had a couple of weird calls. One was a major MVA head-on many years ago when we played ME as well. We had 2 dead on arrival, a husband and a spouse, that were killed instantly in a head-on collision. They had a 12-year-old daughter that was in between them, and they actually took the impact, saving her life. While en route, we noticed the husband's arm had come loose, so I went back to restrap it. As I was doing that, the wife's arm suddenly fell out as well, and her hand fell into her husband's. My boss was watching in the rearview mirror and helped clear the way as I ran back into the front. It spooked both of us. Apparently, the couple, in their mid-30s, had just found out that he was cancer-free after his last treatment. I had a young woman in full liver failure. She was orange in color, and she was still conscious. She asked me what I thought it would be like to die. I told her I didn't know, but that I hoped it wouldn't be painful. She then asked me if I thought I would go to heaven. I told her that I believed I would. She asked me if I thought she would go to heaven, and I told her that I wasn't able to answer that question. She then told me, I am going to heaven, and I know it, and I asked her how she knew that, and then she told me something that I will never, ever forget. She told me, I know I am because that man over there told me so. I asked, what man? And she said the man sitting on the end of the bench. I asked her what he looked like, and she said, he looks just like the Jesus on the windows of my church. Well, to tell you, I was pretty well affected by that statement. She then went on to say, and he says that you're going to heaven too. We then prayed, and I will never forget that interaction between the two of us. About a week later, she passed away. I hope she made it to heaven. I have had fellow coworkers swear that strange things have occurred in the ER. 2 people that I work with were charting at the nurses' station when they both heard a scream followed by incoherent words come from one of our open bays. There were 3 patients in the room, and they denied screaming or hearing anything at all. I have also had fellow coworkers talk about hearing strange voices, especially after really bad codes, and one person states that she felt someone grabbing her shoulder after the doctor pronounced a trauma code. These are all respectable people, and I do not think they would lie. We responded to a sick call at about 4 a.m. Dispatch said he was a hospice patient with a history of cancer who had not eaten for a couple of days and had pulled out his medication port. We get there and it's this poor guy in his early 40s who's bald from chemo and sitting on his brother's couch. His skin was blotchy, pale, and purple, and he was hyperventilating and diaphoretic. His sister-in-law said that he'd been pacing from the bed to the couch all night, clearly agitated. We went out to get the stretcher, and when we came back in, he had crapped himself. He just kept saying, oh, no, oh, and looking around the room, flinching every now and then like he was waving away flies. We got him to sit on the stretcher, and he said, no, not now. We assured him and rolled him out. The medic I was with asked me to get DNR papers because he's doing it right now. I walked up to his brother and sister-in-law and got the do not resuscitate papers and returned just in time to see him cry a couple of big tears, sob a little, and then crumple. I had to tell his brother that he had passed. Not easy to see a man drop to his knees in a driveway and wail. Then I got in and prepared to drive to the ER. As I wondered if the man would go to heaven, I got a really bad feeling, like darkness was creeping all around us. I happened to look down at the voltmeter, and I saw the number 666 flashing. This panel normally doesn't flash at all, it just reads voltage. It went 666, then 0.1, then 666, then 0.1, back and forth, and then It went back up to 1200 or so and stayed that way. The uneasy feeling eventually went away, but I still prayed the whole way to the hospital. I felt sick as hell all that day and had violent vomiting spells later on. That poor guy. I hope he's okay, wherever he is. This is a true story about an ongoing haunting that is occurring in Richmond, Virginia at a local ambulance company located just off Broad Street near the Willow Lawn Shopping Center. My 25-year-old son-in-law has been working at this company as an EMT for approximately a year now, and he comes home weekly with new, haunting stories. The small brick building was once a warehouse of some type, and during a fire many years ago, several people were trapped inside and died. They were Hispanic migrant workers who apparently slept in the warehouse. It is now used as an ambulance company, and during the 24-hour shifts, EMT people are required to spend the night in the building. There is also a dispatcher who is always on duty, even during the night hours. When my son-in-law first went to work there, he wondered why the sleeping cots were set up in the smaller room rather than the larger bunk room. He was told that the larger room was haunted, and if people tried to sleep there, they would feel cold hands on them in the night. He didn't know whether to believe this or not, but he did notice that whenever he worked a 24-hour shift and slept there, he had very bad nightmares, and he'd wake up to a cold, tingling feeling running up and down his spine. They think that there are at least 2 ghosts in the building. The first is an aggressive one who bangs the chain on the bay door, walks around the bay area, slams doors, and puts his cold hands on people. The other is a woman. She's also been seen in the office area. She was sighted recently when 2 ambulance workers walked by the office window and saw a short, dark-haired woman in the office. Not recognizing her, they went back to find out who she was, but there was nobody there. I had a paramedic supervisor back in the 90s who had 20 years in EMS and had a reputation for being a tough guy with a big heart. He told us a story that raised the hair on the back of my neck, and I will never forget it. In 1981, he was an EMT for a volunteer fire department in New Hampshire, a little farming community there. In this town lived an elderly brother and sister, along with an elderly cousin on a sprawling farm. They were very well liked by the townsfolk, and they would offer a plot of their farmland to anyone for the asking, with the one simple rule. No matter what they grew, they had to donate 1/3 of their yield to area food banks. This was just one of the reasons they were so beloved. As they got older, Mary, the sister, became frail with osteoporosis and was admitted to a nursing home. John, her brother, was left to look after the farm. One day, the cousin who lived nearby was unable to reach John by phone and became concerned. He went to the farm and entered the house. He discovered John in an upstairs bedroom, unconscious, suffering from a stroke. He immediately called 911. Word of the trouble at the farm spread quickly, and soon the siren was blaring, notifying volunteers in the town. The town's police and ambulance raced to the farm. An ambulance from an adjoining community was also dispatched. My boss was one of the EMTs responding and was very familiar with this family. When he arrived, he said he walked into the house and was told to hurry as CPR was underway. As he entered the front hall, on his left was a sitting room, and in the room he noticed an elderly woman sitting in a rocking chair, smiling back at him. He thought how happy and peaceful she looked, and thought that it was a bit odd given what was going on. He then recognized her. It was Mary. They get John to the ambulance and transported him to the hospital, where he was pronounced on arrival. As my boss was filling out his report at the nurse's station, he made a comment to one of the staff of how sad that it was that Mary was well enough to go home, just to have John die like that. The staff member gave him a strange look and asked what he was talking about. My boss said how great Mary looked at the house. He was then informed that Mary had passed away the day before at the nursing home and could not possibly have been at the farm. Thinking he mistook someone else for Mary, he asked around about who the female in the house was, but there were no females during the call. All the responders were male. He then described what she was wearing, including an oversized set of pearls and a pink flowered dress, to the staff. That dress was Mary's favorite. He had no doubt that the pleasant elderly woman who gave him a warm smile was indeed Mary. 2 days later, my boss and his then-girlfriend decided to attend the wake for John and Mary, double wake and funeral, as Mary was the girlfriend's grade school teacher. As my boss walked into the funeral home, he gazed over the coffin holding Mary and nearly fainted. For there was Mary, wearing her favorite pink-flowered dress and the oversized pearl necklace, exactly as she wore it 2 days earlier at the farm. One night we got a call to do a wellness check on someone who dialed 911 but didn't respond to the operator. We pull up to the address and the house looks perfectly quaint, and the little old lady greets us at the door. We asked her if she knew who called, but she said that she lived alone ever since her husband died. We barely got back to the station before a call comes in again, same address as before. So we drive back out and talk to the old lady again, and then leave again. Just as we get back to the station, same call, same address, no response. We drive out there again, believing that the old lady must have been confused, but this time when we pulled into the driveway, the old lady wasn't at the door to greet us. There was no reply at the door, but it was unlocked. We take a peek inside to find the old lady was on the floor and wasn't breathing. We rushed in to help and got her to a hospital in stable condition. When she woke up in the ambulance, she still claimed that she never called us and that we arrived almost immediately after she had fallen. It was a 15-minute drive to her house from the station. Before she was admitted to the hospital, she asked me and another EMT if we could bring her knitting needles and bag of clothes. I offered to pick her stuff up because I had a friend who lived in that area and we were going to hang out anyway. I pick up my friend and drive to the lady's house. I ran inside to grab the bag and knitting stuff while my buddy sat in the car. But just as I was leaving, I swear I felt a hand on my back and I heard a voice say, "Thank you." When I got back in the car, my friend asked me why couldn't the lady's husband bring her stuff to the hospital. I explained to her that the husband was dead, but when I said that, my friend said, "Then who's the guy in the window? He just smiled and waved at me." At first, I refused to believe in anything supernatural, so I called the police and asked them to do a sweep of the house. I honestly thought it was a squatter. Nothing was out of the ordinary, and nobody was inside. I later brought my friend to visit the lady. He started describing the old dude who was in the window, but the old lady almost immediately started crying. She looked at him and said, "That's my Harold." I will never forget that experience. I was an EMT for a while. We got a call one day about someone who was riding their bike at breakneck speed when they hit a car head first without a helmet. We went over immediately. Despite the fact that it was broad daylight and we were in the middle of suburbia on a Saturday, nobody even came to check on the poor guy. Seriously, the streets were empty. Usually a massive crowd gathers around violent accidents like this. But he was just alone. So his skull was pretty much smashed in and he was unresponsive. It was the worst head injury I'd ever seen. We assessed that he had a major skull fracture, a concussion, and was bleeding profusely. He was also missing teeth and had a minor road rash, but fortunately he wasn't missing much skin. To give you an idea of how bad it was, this was the kind of injury that most people don't survive. If you did survive, you'd basically be a crippled vegetable. Normally we would have moved him off the road, but when someone has a head and neck injury, that isn't very safe to do. My partner, who was also training me as I was still kind of new, went to check his pulse while I began to unload our gear. He crouched down, felt for a pulse for a while, and then stood up and opened his mouth to say something. Suddenly, the guy jumps up. He didn't use his arms to pick himself up, he just jumped to his feet. It startled the two of us. He looked at us, smiled, and attempted to grab his bike. We tried to stop him, but we didn't exactly want to wrestle him to the ground given his condition. He gets away from us and bolts into the woods without his bike. My partner was in even more disbelief than I was. He just stared at where the man had run off, mouth agape. Then he turned to me and muttered, "He had no pulse, man." I asked him if he was sure, and he swore up and down that the biker was clinically dead. We contacted the authorities for assistance, and they sent a search and rescue team into the forest. I don't know if he was found or not, because we normally don't get much information about patients after they go to the professionals. My best guess is that he went to a loved one's house out of confusion. What I found odd about this is head injuries bleed like crazy, so you would think that this guy would have been leaving a long, red trail of blood for the cops to follow. But apparently, there wasn't a drop. I worked as a police officer in a small town in rural Nebraska. Back in the 90s, I was patrolling through town in winter. We had several abandoned houses in town, but one seemed to have the attraction of copper thieves, so we were told to keep an eye on it. We drove by it around 7 p.m. since it sat on a corner lot. I had a clear view of all four sides of the house. As I drove around the corner, nothing looks out of the ordinary, but about 2 hours later I drive by again and the back door is wide open. I know that the back door was not open when I drove by it earlier. Looking at the snow on the ground around the house, there were no footprints, so I'm thinking, what the hell? I call dispatch, tell them I'm investigating an open door at that address, and ask for a county sheriff to start my way. I walk to the open door, pull out my flashlight, and shine it inside. The house has obviously been gutted for the most part. The plaster walls have been torn down, debris piles everywhere. Since there were no footprints in the snow around the door other than mine, and with all the dust on the floor not showing footprints, I chalk it up to the wind, or maybe the door just opened on its own. I was about to secure the door when I heard a loud thump come from upstairs and what sounded like kids laughing. So I enter the house and yell out, "Police department, come downstairs." More of what sounds like kids playing. I tell dispatch that it sounds like there are kids in the house and start making my way through the kitchen into the living room where the stairs are. All the while, I'm cautiously checking the main floor. 2 more times I hear something upstairs, but since I've had no response, I start thinking maybe it's an animal. Still, I hear what I'd swear was kids laughing. I head upstairs and it gets all quiet. The upstairs is relatively small with a hallway at the top of it. It has 1 bedroom on the right, 1 straight ahead, at the end of the hall, and 1 on the left. As I get to the top of the stairs, I hear a thump in the bedroom to the left. I carefully peek around the door, and it's an empty room with a small pile of plaster and wood debris in the middle. I kid you not, sitting on top of the pile of debris was a page torn out of a child's book with a picture of a police officer on it. The hair stood up on the back of my neck. I got out of that room, quickly cleared the other rooms upstairs, and got the hell out of there. I told dispatch nobody was in the house, locked the back door, and never went inside again. I'm a 911 dispatcher, and I will always remember Mr. Blue. Mr. Blue is the nicest old man, living kind of out in the middle of the desert. He was tagged in our system as having dementia. We used to take calls from him nearly every night about how his wife's dolls would come to life and torment him, or how his wife was kidnapped by them. I might add here that his wife had long since passed away. So it seemed that every time he would call was just right around my shift, and I just so happened to be the one to take his calls most of the time. It was a little creepy being on the phone with him at times. He would randomly shush me, and you could actually hear little footsteps. Or he would explain that there was somebody living in his couch that he could hear laughing at him. Nicest old man, and you never want to deny them. So I'd stay on 911 with him and talk to him about his life until the deputies arrived. Mr. Blue doesn't call anymore, and I have no idea what happened to him. A friend's father is a police officer in one of the larger villages of Illinois. He and his partner were working night shift when they were called to investigate a suspected break-in at the local morgue. They arrived to find the custodian waiting for them out front. The custodian said that he'd been mopping one of the corridors and had seen something move in his peripheral vision. He looked up and saw a person quickly cross from one side of the hallway to the other. He couldn't tell much about the person as he'd been turning the lights off as he worked his way through the building, just a dim outline, but enough to be sure of what he'd seen. He was unarmed, so he called the police and stepped outside to wait. My friend's dad and his partner entered the morgue. They started off by calling out to anyone who might be inside. No answer. Then began to do a sweep, walking down the central corridor with hands on their guns, checking each room to the side, occasionally calling out for any intruder to show themselves. My friend's dad came upon a room with the light off, pitch black inside. He fumbled for the switch and flicked it. The room lit up, but nothing but an empty waiting room for relatives of the dead awaited him. He heard his partner call out, "Hey, stop, turn around." My friend's dad swung back out into the corridor, and his partner had unholstered his gun and was pointing it at the end of the long corridor. He said, "She went around that corner." The custodian said, "She's trapped. There are no exits that way." They had the custodian lock himself in the waiting room for safety, then advanced down the corridor, calling out to the woman to show herself, that they wouldn't hurt her. This time, my friend's dad reached the end first, and with his back to the wall peered around the corner. The woman was standing by a big gray door. Lights were off here too, so it was hard to see her clearly, but he could see that she wasn't holding a gun, had long, fair hair, and was just standing there. He stepped out from behind the corner to talk to her, but she opened the door, disappeared into the dark inside, and shut it firmly behind her. He sprinted up to the door and pulled at the handle. It was locked. He banged on it for a while and called out to her, but there was no answer. The door had a deadlock on it, so his partner brought over the custodian to unlock it. They turned on their flashlights to see better. The custodian rounded the corner and faltered a little. "This door? You sure? This door doesn't lock from the inside." The custodian found the right key and carefully turned it in the lock. Click. "We're coming in. Have your hands up." They entered the room, flashlights illuminating every corner. The custodian hit the light switch and the room lit up. It was completely empty, except for some equipment against the wall and two gurneys in the middle of the room. One was empty, and one was covered in a sheet, with what appeared to be a body underneath it. Nice hiding spot, right? My friend's dad approached it, and it was the smell that first spooked him. It smelled like a corpse. He pulled the sheet down, and there the woman lay, straggly, light brown hair all around her face. The tag on her toe said that she had died 4 days ago. Welcome back. I hope you guys enjoyed that selection of stories. At the beginning, when I recorded the introduction, I was only going to read that first article, but then I happened upon a couple others. And that last one was a couple of stories from Reddit that had been compiled in a different article. So I will link everything that I read below. Excuse me. And yeah, I know the last couple weren't technically EMT stories, but they were just too good not to add. I think those are some of the creepiest EMT stories and police first responder stories that I have ever heard, and I just wanted to share them. And I think one of you recently requested EMT stories, and I had been sort of compiling these articles and collections of stories, so I thought this would be a great time to do it. So I hope you guys enjoyed those. If you're new here, welcome. Welcome to the Conspiracy of Ravens. Be sure to click subscribe and then hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any uploads. And if you liked the video, be sure to like it. And yeah, that's all for now. Thank you guys so much for being here. I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.